Good morning and welcome to Making Peace with Money with your host, Lori Lamantia, Professor, CPO, and Prosperity Coach. Get ready to master your life and your money, not the other way around. Now, here is your host, Lori Lamantia.
Good morning and welcome to Making Peace with Money. I'm Amy Wagner and I'm the guest host sitting in for Lori Lamantia this morning. And today's show is about walking your talk. It's kind of a practical approach to growing your prosperity consciousness. It's about how to grow in consciousness from lack and limitation to prosperity and abundance. And I've been realizing lately that so many people are now interested in and practicing the metaphysical approaches to life, subjects that Lori talks about every week on this show. And in fact, like the law of attraction is almost becoming a mainstream phrase at this point. And I think that's a good thing, a very good thing. It's time for our world to start using the inner powers that we've got available to us instead of just looking at the outside world for making our way. But as we start using the law of attraction and listening to so many of the popular teachings, there seems to be kind of a disconnect. And that, to me, is that there's a need to address how aligned we are in what we say and what we do. Hence the topic, walking your talk, this morning. And what I'd like to do in our hour together is to offer a very simple formula for transformation. It's a process that you can use to gauge where your attitude is really at and use it to change yourself and thus your circumstances whenever you become aware of it. And that's part of the model of transformation. That's part of consciousness, is becoming aware. Now, there are 3 steps in this model that will help you see the congruency between your word, your intention, and your actions. But first off, I'd like to invite you to just take a minute and think about your own sense of well-being. So let's do a little self-check. Now, right now, in this moment, do you feel at ease with who you are? Is there a deep sense of well-being in you? Can you feel any low-level anxiety? What's going on inside of you right now? If I asked you about what you do for your creative work or your primary relationship, is that sense of well-being still there? And if I asked about your main source of income or your physical health, can you sense any shifts inside? Is there still a feeling of ease within you? Has your stress button been pushed? Now, even if there's tension, can you start to sense that right underneath the tension, the well-being is still there? Now, the reason for these questions is twofold. One, they illustrate that when we're talking about prosperity consciousness, we're talking about every aspect of your life, not just your bank account. Prosperity means a thriving, successful, or flourishing condition. And that condition is the condition that starts with what's going on inside of you. The whole big crazy quilt of your life is colored and textured by your inner states of being. You shape your life by your particular attitudes and beliefs. You sculpt your circumstances by your intentions and your expectations. Now, the second reason for these questions is that in order to actually make a change within ourselves, we first have to be able to really know what's going on inside. And that's the first step in this formula for transformation, for change. The first step is to notice. Now, in order to change outer circumstances, we always start from within, right? And becoming aware of what you're feeling inside is the first step in waking up out of an unconscious trance. When you're noticing what you're saying and feeling, what you're doing, it's so important to be honest with yourself. Authenticity is a key to making lasting changes. And being honest with yourself, it's It's like a multifaceted gift. It reveals parts of you that you might not have known were there, you might have been in denial about, things in shadow. And as it reveals that stuff, it starts to lessen the tension that you have in your body-mind, the tension that you might have around those parts, simply because of the fact that you've actually noticed them. The parts of us that we would rather not see, the parts that we might not even realize are there, all need to be brought into our awareness, not to necessarily be fixed, not to necessarily be judged or changed, simply to be noticed. And anyone that's gone through any kind of maturing process knows this. Now, there's another part about this shadow, the things that we don't necessarily talk about that might not be on our everyday radar screen, and that has to do with our conditioning. We live in a culture that really has an emphasis on consuming, on accumulating, and on competing. And that's obvious. Take a look around, especially at this time of the year with sale flyers and Cyber Monday and Black Friday, and it's all about that. And it's not necessarily bad, but it makes a huge impact on our psyches, whether we are conscious of it or not. So those are the obvious things, the consuming, the accumulating, the competing. The not so obvious are the unspoken assumptions that lie behind those things, assumptions about struggle and strife, hidden attitudes about not having enough, or that you're not cool enough if you don't have this, or that you have to get yours before someone else does. And all of these hidden things are referred to as the collective unconscious, and they are a huge part of our conditioning. Our conditioning is what we feel about things like money and marriage and illness. What do we really believe about work or dieting or sex, religion or politics? You name it, and there's part of you that's been conditioned to hold a particular viewpoint. And you may or may not realize the depths and the effects of this conditioning until you start to really want to change, until you start to really desire to experience something more of life. When I started to grow into a more prosperous consciousness, one of the conditioned areas I had to face revolved around my family's attitude towards money. Phrases like, we barely have 2 nickels to rub together, or money doesn't grow on trees. They were very commonly uttered. There was a belief that you had to work hard and long in order to eke out a living, that life was basically a struggle. There was also a belief that you didn't dare to dream too big because you wouldn't be able to be safe or have the safety net of something if you ventured outside of the status quo, if you ventured outside of the family history, the unspoken boundaries that were put around what the family did for its livelihood. Now, one learned to be very resourceful, and phrases like making a silk purse out of a sow's ear were also commonly heard. And in actuality, there were always enough money for necessities. The bills were always paid on time. There was food on the table. There were clothes on our backs. But there wasn't a belief in prospering. There was a belief in surviving. And that was a big difference. And it is a big difference. Nothing unexpected could enter into our circumstances because there was no belief in anything beyond what was visible. And there was no imagination to start to grow and expand, to dream beyond what we had already known. So when I look back on how all of this impacted me, I started to become conscious. I saw that there were a few things worth keeping, like how to be resourceful, but there was a shift in the core belief. I could be resourceful because I had so much, not because I was afraid that there wasn't enough. And that's what transformation and change and noticing are all about, becoming more aware of the why and the how that you do what you do. So what core beliefs are you ready to look at? And what was your family attitude toward money or wealth? And are those things still relevant to you today? And to bring it up to the present and not only focus on histories, what kinds of things are impacting you today from our culture, from society? What kind of things, what kind of messages are you being barraged with every day that you might not really agree with, or that produce some kind of feeling of struggle or tension or less than enough within you? Those things are worth noticing, and they're worth paying attention to. It's worth noticing what you react to and what you respond to. And that in itself is a very good gauge of how comfortable you are with your own sense of prosperity, your own sense of well-being. Remember, prosperity is a thriving, flourishing condition. It's a state of mind, a state of being. Now, by paying attention to what we're saying and how we're feeling, by being willing to look deeply at our underlying motives, we start to wake up. We start to make what's been hidden from us, what's been unconscious, conscious. And in addition to noticing what kinds of emotions are swimming around inside of you, what kind of knee-jerk reactions, here's another great practice. It's the power of your word. Now, language is key for determining what you're really centered in and for retraining your thoughts to be more equated with your greater understanding of what's possible. Our language and the words we use every day reveal so much about us. And the only way to really gauge yourself is to listen to what you're saying by paying attention to every word that comes out of your mouth. And in fact, I would like to offer that as a challenge to anyone who's interested. For a week, pay attention to everything that you say. Listen to yourself as you speak, as well as listening to others and watching reactions. Start to just curiously look inside and listen. Whether you're speaking to your mate, your boss, your child, or your parent, whether you're talking to a friend or a store clerk or the mail carrier, when you actually listen to what you say, you get the huge reflective mirror right back that lets you know where your consciousness is at. Our culture is loaded with seemingly harmless phrases that just roll off our tongues like a bad habit. I don't care. It doesn't matter. Whatever. This sucks. I'm broke. I'm sick and tired. Or, yeah, right. Things like that we say every day, and we're not even aware of them. But the way that this plane of existence works with the fact that our consciousness and where we're really at in consciousness is what gets multiplied and corresponded to in the outer world, those little seemingly harmless phrases matter. And if you believe them, then say them. But if you don't, and if you start to notice that they are actually producing tension in you when you say them, that's something to look at and something that you may be deciding it's worth changing. Now, even the most benign conversation will reflect back to you what you really believe. I had a conversation with a woman who told me she was an optimist. To her, the glass was always half full. But a few moments into this conversation, a few minutes later, she was telling me of her niece's upcoming marriage and she said, I'll give it 5 years. It'll never last. She'd never even recognized the conflict, the contradiction in her own words. How could you possibly really consider yourself an optimist and 40 seconds later say, it'll never work. I'll give it 5 years. It'll never last. Which part is true? Well, probably both to some degree. But when you're trying to grow into prosperity consciousness, when you genuinely want to change yourself, to start to mature on the inside, those kinds of contradictions are really important to pay attention to. And ultimately, they end up kind of canceling each other out. One, the statement about being an optimist, ends up being something that in your mind, your thinking mind, it sounds good, you want it. But then the thing that just blurts out, like, I'll give it 5 years, it'll never last, that's the part that's more heartfelt. That comes from a place that's also more habitually conditioned in you to be a response. And when we start to notice the things that we're saying, those are the kinds of areas where when you pay attention, you can make a choice as to what is really more true for you. When we come back from the break, we'll continue to explore the power of your word and what you can do. Welcome back. I'm Amy Wagner, guest host today, sitting in for Lori Lamantia. And before the break, we were talking about prosperity consciousness and the power of your word. Our topic today is how to walk your talk. And I'm offering a very simple 3-step formula for change, for transformation, and how to grow inside from lack and limitation to abundance and prosperity. And right before the break, we were talking about what to notice in your life, noticing how you talk, noticing the words you say, noticing what you feel inside when you say and do what you do. Now, the power of your word can reveal to you exactly where you're at in consciousness. The language, the phrasing that we use is such a tell. And it's very easy to see this when you observe and actually listen to other people. It may be a bit more challenging to turn that gaze onto yourself, but it is really worth the time and the effort to do so. It makes you aware of where you're at. And being unaware of the contradictions that we have between what we say and what we do, or what we really mean and feel inside, that keeps us in these old habits. That keeps us in a stagnant, limited consciousness, which is not a thriving condition. And remember that that's what prosperity is. It's a thriving condition. And I'd like to paraphrase from a pop song from the 80s. I think it was by The Fix. And that is, say what you mean and mean what you say. One thing leads to another. Now, who knew that such spiritual wisdom would come from a pop group from the 1980s? But it's true. Because the more you're aligned in thought, word, and deed, the clearer you are. And when you stop to think about it, we all know this. It is inherent. It is innate in us. We all know when it feels right inside and when it doesn't. We all know when we're aligned and when we're not. And the more you're congruent, the more you're in harmony with what you're feeling and actually saying and doing, the clearer you get, and that leads to less internal resistance. It actually lessens the tension in your body-mind. It lessens the nervousness and the anxiety, which then leads to greater opportunities for noticing and being part of the flow and circulation and ease that's always ever present. But when we get so wrapped up and tense and anxious about things, and when we're so out of alignment, it's very difficult to utilize the good that's already flowing and circulating in our life. We get ourselves knotted up. But all these things, all this ease, circulation, flow, these are all qualities of a prosperity consciousness. And when you can start to recognize those qualities in yourself, that they really are already there, you start to change your language. Now, I invited you earlier in the show to consider taking this challenge of noticing what you're saying and feeling for a week. No judgments here, just noticing. For 1 week, paying attention to every word that comes out of your mouth, no matter where you are or who you're talking to. It really does all count. And there are no judgments here. You could probably take the approach that you're a very curious scientist studying an extremely rare species of life, which is you, and you want to know what makes them tick. And when you start to take that approach and you just notice, look out, because here comes change. And this is the second step in my formula for transformation, change. The second step is decision. Once you've actually gotten into the habit of really listening to what you're saying, and you pay attention to your levels of tension or ease, you start to be able to sense automatically when you contract and when you expand, when you feel weak, when you feel strong, when you feel okay, when you feel threatened. You're actually aware of it consciously. When that's happened, and it doesn't take long, really just sometimes a day, you can start to get into the groove of this, then you've reached a point where change can start to enter into the equation. And that means that it's time to decide if these postures and perspectives, if these things that you're saying and doing are really serving you in healthy, expansive ways. Now, there's great power in making a decision. See, decisions mean that you're aware of the many options around your circumstances. It means that you've grown yourself beyond thinking or believing that there's only one or two ways to get your life going in a new direction. Choices are seen and they're recognized by those people who use their imagination, by those people who are willing to think outside of their historic, conditioned box. They know themselves well enough to be honest, to be authentic in where they're at, and they've already made a decision to change how they view the world, to change how they view themselves, and to not react automatically. And that decision is conscious. They're actually aware of it. Now, there's a wonderful thing that happens when you make a conscious decision to change. And that's in that instant, that brief moment, when you say to yourself, you know, I don't have to be so tense about my finances. I can be relaxed a bit more, and I'm going to choose to trust more that everything's really working pretty smoothly. In the moment that you make that choice, you have actually raised your own vibration. You have actually started to shed and release old tensions, and that moment you start to qualitatively attract more of what you are, more of what you truly want. And that more ends up being qualitatively matched with the ease inside of you, the sense of well-being inside of you. And isn't that what we really are all struggling and competing and accumulating for, is because we think we don't have that well-being? So, back to decision. Change, power, choice, conscious, in the moment. You see, there's this little something that we've each been given. It lets us decide the how and the when and the if of any state of consciousness. And that little something is called free will. But it's not really free if we end up sleepwalking through life, if we're reacting to the world in our unconscious, conditioned ways. That is not free will. That's habit. That is not conscious choice. That's unconscious reaction. And when you've made a decision to grow and change and to be more rooted internally and less attached externally, you have this gift of choice of making a conscious decision that will keep you in integrity with who you know yourself to be and of what and how you want to experience in your life. Making a decision to change your perspectives and to go beyond your usual approach to situations has an inherent belief built into it. And that belief is that there's more to life than you're currently experiencing. Do you see that? Let me put it another way. When you decide to approach daily life in a new way, you've already had the inkling that the old ways aren't working for you. You already know that there's something else. There's something more in you that wants to come out. And in that moment of decision, in that moment of conscious choice, you're perfectly on your way to sloughing off the patterns and habits that keep most people in very limited life situations. By making a decision to grow in consciousness, you've just said yes to opening up to your potential. Now, making a decision to change does not mean that you have to work against or around what you don't want. It does require that you work with and for whatever it is that you do want. Let me say that again. When you want to grow into a new idea of yourself, when you want to expand what life is for you, you don't have to be at war with the aspects or the conditioning that you want to let go of. In fact, being at war or being very against something actually heightens the resistance, which keeps it tied to you like a very tight knot. But when you want to grow and change into this new, expansive version of yourself, you are required, however, to replace this old stuff, the old aspects, the old conditioning, with something new. You'll only experience authentic change, authentic transformation, if you begin to cultivate the qualities that you want more of. And when we come back from break, we'll talk about the third step in the formula, Empire. Welcome back to the show. I'm Amy Wagner, sitting in for Lori Lamantia today. And before the break, we're talking about a model of transformation, how to go from lack and limitation to a healthy prosperity consciousness. We've covered step 1 and step 2. Step 1 is to notice. Step 2 is to decide. And now we're at step 3, the final step, and that is embodiment. Embodiment is where the talk becomes the walk. Just to reflect back a little bit. First, you've looked into your own reactions to daily life. You've noticed that you don't always say what you really mean, or that perhaps you sound pretty negative in a lot of casual conversations. And you've noticed that there's tension in your body when you're faced with things you'd rather not deal with. Now, it bears repeating. All this noticing is completely non-judgmental. You're not beating yourself up about this stuff. Remember, you're just looking at yourself with great curiosity, with affection, and you're wondering, what the heck is it that makes me tick? And when you notice something that doesn't equate with what you know in your heart is your clearest you, a voice inside says, okay, time to make a change. That's your decision point. It's time to look at the world with a new pair of lenses. And in that moment, it's embodiment. Embodiment is about actually being what you say you want to be. And it's a qualitative thing. It's something that lines up your inner vision with your outer behavior, qualitatively. And it's what Gandhi meant when he advised us to be the change we wish to see in the world, which unfortunately is almost cliched right now because it's on every greeting card or T-shirt or bumper sticker. But when you actually take those words to heart and you realize the man was offering a perfect model for how to change your own world, it makes a lot of sense. And Gandhi knew what he was talking about, that be comes before see. Being comes before seeing it in your outer world. Because as we said earlier, and it's been repeated many times on this show, any kind of change in outer circumstances and situations is always preceded by a change on the inside. Whether that's a new thought, a new feeling, whether that's a relaxation of old attitudes or perspectives. The change happens on the inside first before it's ever going to show up and change on the outside. So, you can have a big dream about being financially free. You can recite affirmations about wealth all day. But if when you sit down to pay the bills, you get really tense and nervous, or if you're constantly complaining about how expensive things are, or how hard it is, or how there's not enough time, or there's not enough this, you've just acted in ways that say survival, not thriving. That is an example of a lack consciousness, not a prosperity consciousness. But what are the qualities of a healthy prosperity consciousness? What qualities could you embody in order to grow and really change yourself? Well, gratitude, value, imagination, the quality of growth. These are just a few traits that we can each access. It's already in us, and we can shine them out into our worlds through doing what we do. But let's start with gratitude. Being genuinely thankful for what's here today in your life is a great way to initiate inner change. And the word genuine is key here. Real gratitude isn't just a reactionary emotion. It's not just this it's not just this culturally obligatory response. Real gratitude can be a very causative, inspirational force. And if you'd like, just try this experiment. Set an intention that you want to feel grateful. Just an intention to feel grateful. And pretty soon you'll be noticing all the good things in your life, all the blessings in a myriad of forms that keep pouring into your world. Being thankful for what's going on in your life right now immediately reduces or erases your inner resistance and tension. It clarifies, which is like polishing the lenses on your new specs. Did you know the word blessing comes from a root word which means to confer prosperity upon? So you could translate that as meaning that when you're giving thanks, when you're blessing something, you're actually starting to play in this arena of infinite goodness. You're doing the conferring of prosperity. You're starting to circulate in the river of abundance that's always here. Now, another quality, value, a consciousness of value helps build your prosperity muscle. What do you currently value? A good way to gauge that is by noticing where you place your attention and your energies. Now ask yourself, if that person, place, or thing, wherever you're putting a lot of your time, a lot of your mental energy, is that really what you value? And if it isn't, Remember, no judgment against this, but you've got the creative power to make a different choice. Why would you keep investing your resources, your energy and your time, your money, your talents into something that you don't value? You're free to change your mind, to change your actions to more accurately harmonize with what you want to grow into. And then give to what you value, or value what you give to. And the giving means everything. It does mean your time. It means your love. It means your resources. It means your attention. But by starting to exercise this consciousness of value, you can identify what's really meaningful to you, and you back it up with conscious choice, conscious action. And in doing that, you're effectively multiplying that qualitative thing in your daily life. Now, the quality of growth is another key aspect of prosperity. We can be fluid here. We don't have to stay in these stagnant boxes. We can either grow and change along with all the things that grow and change, or we can try to stagnate and resist. But when was the last time you noticed that you've grown into something more? When was the last time that you tried something new? Do you give of yourself in the same ways as last year or 5 years ago? Expecting a change, much less an increase in something on the outside, without growing yourself, it leads to disappointment. Expanding our ideas of who we are and what we have to give produces a greater harvest. Growth is natural, and growth is change. It's rooted in an urge to experience more life. It isn't always comfortable, but it's always worth doing. And before we go to break, consider this. Could this problem or challenge that you might have in your life right now actually really be a blessing, which is calling to you to grow outside of yourself, to grow beyond what you thought you could be? And instead of having the world rock you, all of a sudden now you're rocking the world? Could it be that simple? That's why the challenge might be here? We'll talk more after a break. Welcome back to the show. I'm Amy Wagner, sitting in for Lori Lamantia today. Before the break, we were talking about the qualities of a prosperity consciousness, growth, value, and gratitude. And one of the last qualities I'd like to bring up is the quality of imagination. Someone that's got a prosperous consciousness is creatively imaginative. They have a mindset and an outlook that's supple and flexible. They're willing to consider new and different ideas and concepts. And here's a couple of questions for your own transformational journal. When was the last time you let your imagination run wild? What's your current idea of the best possible creative work you could have, or the most satisfying relationship? What ideas do you have about health and vitality in relation to yourself? By noticing what you've been imagining or not imagining, you start to come to that place of decision again, the second step in our model. And in that decision point, will you choose to stay in that old mindset, those old beliefs, or will you choose to limber up your creative abilities and to play lightly with something new? So these are just a few of the qualities of a prosperous consciousness. And you see, being a prosperous person, it doesn't have anything to do with how much money you have. It's a state of being. It's a state of consciousness. So is poverty. So is peace. So is greatness. So is brokenness. Clearing out the resistance or internal blocks to flow is done consciously. It's done on purpose. And if the state of mind you had yesterday has brought you to where you are right now, It's going to hold the status quo into tomorrow unless you decide to change. You change to bring a vastness to your outlook on life. You change to grow into a fuller expression of what you are, of what you have to give. And when there's a willingness to let the status quo fall away, perhaps even to let the outer circumstances fall apart, then new life can flow in and rejuvenate. Changing your perspective begins with genuinely connecting to that sometimes quiet urge that's already within you. Now, waiting for prosperity to get here is going to leave you waiting. Stating that you're not going to give anything until someone or something on the outside accepts you or changes, that's a block. Be honest about that. Nothing happens differently on the outside until it's changed on the inside first. What you want, you can become it. Choosing now to feel freer, to feel secure, to value yourself as you are is the beginning of embodying a fresh consciousness of prosperity, of being self-actualized. And notice that none of these require anything other than your participation. Nothing more than your decision. It doesn't take money or time to develop a greater sense of well-being. It takes your willingness to participate in your own potential. We live in a self-harmonizing system, a system that balances by corresponding to what we are being and giving. And when our words don't line up with our expectations and actions, we get what's in harmony with that apparent randomness. But when we get in touch with our true nature and match word and deed to expectation, we start to experience what's in harmony with that. Synchronicities, opportunities instead of obstacles, and an undisturbed sense of well-being. That is growing into a consciousness of prosperity. So, notice where you're at right now. What are you expecting to happen today? What are you accepting? What are you identifying with? Remember, you can decide to change and grow. Make the choice to change your perspective. Decide to exercise your imagination. Focus on what you want to become and what you want to experience. And embody the qualities of what you know you're capable of becoming. That simply means watching your words, emotional reactions, and how closely they are in alignment. And then notice again. Notice the shifts that happen in outer circumstances as you grow strong in your new perspective. The shifts may initially be subtle, but pay attention. When you start to recognize these corresponding outer changes with gratitude, you're saying yes to what you are. Final little piece of advice. Take some quiet solo time every day, whether it's 5 minutes or an hour. Make it real for you. Make it doable. But take a little time to just sit, to let everything go. Know that you're creative and unlimited. Know that you're living a life that you cherish, that you value yourself. All that you wish to express is within you now. You're walking your talk, you're in harmony, and your life is good. You've turned on that tap and increased the flow, and it's moving and circulating throughout your life. It's been there all along, and now you see it. You accept that the universe is for you, and you know you're abundant. Thanks for listening. You are abundant. Have a great week.